Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am sitting in lovely Paso Robles, California at Thacher Winery with Sherman Thacher, the owner and winemaker, and Daniel Callan, the assistant winemaker. Welcome, guys, and tell us a little bit about Thacher Winery.
So we're a small family-owned winery. We did our first vintage in 2004 and do mostly Rhones, but we have a little Zin, and we're pretty much tempted to do just about anything that comes across our way. But our focus, I guess, is mostly Rhones.
Where exactly are we located in Paso Robles?
We're in the Adelaida AVA, the sub-AVA of Paso Robles, so out on the west side.
And how large is your property here, and how much do you have planted?
On this property, it's a 52-acre property. We have about 6 acres planted, mostly Zin, then Petite Sirah. We have a little Alicante Boucher and a little plot of Viognier that we planted basically exclusively for co-fermenting with Syrah. So, and then we also have a 15-acre property closer to town that has Cabernet, Syrah, Grenache, Zinfandel, Cinsault, and a field blend with 11 different varietals planted in it. So,
wow.
Yep.
And your total case production?
We're right around 5,000 cases at this point. So.
And distributed nationally or found locally?
Locally, yeah. We've been just kind of growing with demand. So we've been selling most of our stuff out of the tasting room, and we've got some local accounts. So. It's been good, yeah.
Well, so now tell us, when did Thacher Winery start? How'd you get in here and into this property?
So I, right out of college, got hired at a brewery, and the guy I was brewing with back in 92 had worked harvest at a couple wineries, and so in 93 we went out and bought some fruit and did 1 ton of Zinfandel the first year, and then we thought that was going pretty cool, so we got 3 tons the next year, and pretty soon had more wine than we knew what to do with, and so we got a small license, and we're selling basically to restaurants, and we did that up through 2001, and then in 2004 I was looking at moving a little bit further south. I grew up in Ojai, which is a little citrus valley in Ventura County, and kind of wanted to get closer to where I grew up and the more rolling oak kind of terrain. So after visiting Paso Robles quite a few times, my wife was at UCSB. We used to meet here and go wine tasting. We decided this was the spot we wanted to go to. So we started looking at properties probably as early as 2002, but settled on this property in 2004.
And you named the winery Thacher after your last name, but can you tell me, there's a cricket on the label. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. It's technically a grasshopper.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, our family crest has 3 grasshoppers on it and coat of arms and it dates back to England where they did thatched roofs. So our name comes from the Thachers who built straw roofs, and theoretically they had to deal with grasshoppers, I guess. I don't know. We no dragons or bears or anything like that, just a grasshopper, but
a friendly little creature.
Yeah.
And Daniel, when did you come here to Thacher Winery?
I worked here as a harvest intern in 2013, just for a sort of 3-month gig, and then I went over to do a harvest in South Africa, and I was kind of jumping around at the time. And Sherman invited me back for the harvest in 2014, and out of that conversation kind of offered me a full-time gig as cellar master, and so I started that in 2014.
And so together you're making all these beautiful wines as we're sipping a Viognier right now. So tell me something, Thacher, what is your, Sherman, your first memory relevant to wine?
Oh boy. I mean, I'm sure as a kid I pilfered a little bit from mom and dad here and there. Really, I guess my first real solid one, other than drinking some large magnums in college and entertaining friends, it was probably making wine back in 93 with my buddy and going up and really getting into it. It was I didn't really know anything about it. I'd been making beer for about a year by then, and and was around a lot of winemakers up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. A lot of those guys would come down after work and drink beer. So was just in actually the restaurant brewery that I was at had a huge wine list. And so I often tasted with the manager there who was in charge of purchasing wine and really started to expand my, experience with wine at that point. And so that's kind of when it started.
And what about you, Daniel? What's your first memory relevant to wine?
Definitely buying barefoot with a fake ID in college, and me and my girlfriend at the time kind of looking at alcohol percentages versus price points and trying to get the most bang for our buck pretty much. But then I ended up working in a wine shop actually a couple years after that, and had my boss for Christmas said, you can take home any bottle in the shop you want. And I'd been drinking the Lioco Chardonnays, which were always really nice, and then took home one of their single vineyard Pinots, and that was kind of a sort of tipping point wine for me. That wine was really next level. So yeah.
And once you got a little more advanced into wine and moved away from barefoot and whatever you were picking out from Mom and Dad's, do you remember one of the most memorable wine you ever drank, or one of the most memorable? I'm sure you get to drink a lot of great wine. So Daniel, is there a wine that stands out and what the occasion was?
I was traveling around Australia with a friend, another winemaking friend, and ended up at a sort of upscale Vietnamese restaurant in the Barossa Valley. I think the town was Tanunda, and had a Willie Schaefer cabinet that was pretty stunning. And I was always really into white wine. That was kind of one of the wines that kind of sort of reaffirmed my belief in that decision. So.
And Sherman, what about you? Any memorable wine drinking experience?
Yeah, let's see. Nothing that totally pops out. I think it was probably the wine making or drinking experience was probably over consuming at one point or another. But let's see. I'd have to. Yeah, I can't think of anything specific at this point.
You've traveled around the world and worked abroad. Daniel, traveling the world and working abroad, where would you say is sort of one of the best foreign wines you've ever drunk outside of the German Riesling in Australia?
I spent a lot of time in South Africa, and a lot of people kind of associate that with sort of lower end bulk wine. But visiting some of the cellars and Eben Sadi and Adi Badenhorst, and the guy I worked for, Chris Alllight. I mean, those were stunning wines, and old bush vines fermented in a very minimalist style, and really authentically. And I mean, they were just killer wines. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in your experience in making wine, selling wine, traveling and drinking wine, who would you say culturally drinks the best in terms of quality?
Say that again?
Do you think that there's a culture that drinks the best in terms of quality?
Wow. I do like, old world wine. I don't know enough about South African. I mean, Daniel's been spending a lot of time down there, but I really do like French wine, Spanish wine. I spent probably more time in France kind of bouncing around, but sadly not tasting usually at wineries. I have kids in tow, so it's just kind of whatever comes by the table. But I do like the rustic kind of feel that you get from a lot of those wines.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, if I were to walk into either of your cellars, refrigerators, closets, wherever you store your wine, what would I find in there? Sherman?
Wow. Well, I mean, after being here making wine since 2004, there's plenty of trading that goes on. So, the bulk of our wine closet has neighbors' wines, and there's a pretty large amount of Paso Robles stuff, and it's pretty limited on some of the more foreign stuff. But I've been traveling down to San Ynez and where my kid's going to school, and trading down there and buying some wine down there. So I'd say the bulk of it's definitely Central California.
Yeah. And anything in particular that's drinking really well right now?
I am enjoying the lighter varietals, so I've been drinking a lot of Pinots. we make a Cinso that's super light, and so I've been kind of going that direction after making beer for 14 years and going through the whole spectrum of, light to triple IPAs and overhopped beers. I've kind of come full circle back to the lighter, version of both beer and wine. And so that's what I look for when I dig through my cellar. So,
yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All palates come around full circle, don't they? What about you, Danny? What would we find in your cellar or wherever you hide your wine, if you do?
Yeah, my cellar is probably a little bit more moss than Sherman's, but it's just a little corner of the winery. But I'm really interested in a lot of the stuff going on up in Napa and Sonoma, kind of the young gun scene up there. So I've got quite a bit of Sandland stuff, some of the Jamie Motley and Pack stuff, and got a couple not old, but sort of mid 2000s Riojas, lots of Riesling. Some stuff from the Canary Islands have been really interesting to me. So,
and anything in particular drinking really well?
I've been drinking lots of kind of Listan Negro, which is the mission from the Canaries, basically. And those wines are super cheap and affordable, but mega tasty as well.
So working in the vineyard, and you work with a lot of Rhone varieties, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety, Sherman?
No.
Daniel?
I think every place has a perfect variety. It's just a matter of figuring that out. But I don't think there's any one variety that's king of them all.
Yeah, we've found some varieties that are not perfect. So, we grow Petite Sirah, and it fries, a good portion of it fries every summer, and more veds usually last off when you're fighting rain. But they also often turn out pretty delicious as well. So. But, Syrah is one of those ones I think that I really like a lot. It seems to do well in all different climates, and, you get completely different wines from those respective things. So it is a pretty fun grape. I probably planted more than I needed, but I just love it. I like it in blends, and I like it on its own. So we'll see.
It almost achieves perfection. And I know you're a small winery and you're selling mostly direct to consumer, but what's your take sort of on wine critics and scores? How do you perceive those?
I have kind of very mixed views of the whole thing, and I think the biggest problem is that a lot of times your wines are just blended in with everyone else's, and so they're tasted on this huge panel, and you don't have a chance to explain what you're trying to do and accomplish, and so often the value of the wine is completely lost when they're tasting it, and they taste you, and either it's you made it in a different style and on purpose, but they're tasting a bunch of other wines that are similar, so it could come across negative in a large format. So I think meeting with them one-on-one and tasting with them is important if you're gonna get them fully understood. So that's yeah.
Yeah, from a business perspective, I mean, it's nice to get decent scores, but I think I'd be lying if I said I'd have ever bought a wine based on scores. I mean, stories are a little bit more important to me these days, so I'm more interested in reading articles or listening to podcasts, and actually hearing the producer speak and trying to understand the wine through that. I think it's a little bit more worthwhile. So
absolutely. So getting down to wine as a consumer, Sherman, red, white, or rosé?
Light reds.
Daniel, red, white, or rosé?
I'd go white.
Still or sparkling?
Still,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sparkling I like, but it goes too fast. I mean, it's like you open sparkling and you feel like you haven't even had a glass yet, and you're trying to get more out of the bottle that's already empty. So I don't know.
And how do you guys approach food and wine pairings? Do you follow rules? Are there things you look for? Are you choosing wines to pair with the meal, or are you choosing a meal to pair with your wine?
Ooh, question.
I like thinking about it, and usually it's you've got to know your wine pretty well, and then you know what's going to go with whatever's offered. Usually, when we're working with caterers, they're suggesting some food, so at that point you're just thinking about which wines you have in that are tasting good that are going to go with what food is available.
So how would you approach it? Like if you're talking to a consumer who isn't as intimately familiar, they're in a restaurant or, they're out at a party or something and they want to order something, how would you suggest approaching what to choose? Should they pick the wine and do you look for spice? Are you looking for sweetness?
I think a lot of it's, acid is a great component of wine, especially with food. You get big, thick, maybe buttery sauces or whatever. And that acid can often cut through that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're looking to pair things, you might even pair acid with acid but I think for me, a lot of times it's the acid and then it's also structure, if you're going to have, something like a salad or something, you might pick something lighter and more, something with less structure that would go with that. But, and then if you're going to have osso buco, you might, go with something bigger, so.
Absolutely. Anything to add there, Daniel?
Yeah, just knowing wine is really important and having a little bit of an understanding and understanding what's versatile. When I go to a restaurant, if I order wine, that's usually my main focus is the wine, and then I try and build the meal sort of around that. So I don't come in, thinking, what's going to be the perfect pairing. I just think what's going to be an amazing wine for the night and what's going to enhance the social experience of the meal as well. So that's supposed to be good. So
I'm going to ask you a question, and there might be a generational difference here. But when you drink too much, any remedies for hangovers?
Maybe biscuits and gravy.
Hair of dog, eggs, cheese, and hot sauce. A little bacon.
Not so different. Something to coat the stomach and start over again.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
So, in the style of the wines that you make, Sherman, what do you think that someone who hasn't tasted your wine is missing out on?
I wouldn't say they're missing out because there's lots of options, but what we really try and we start with is building mouthfeel, and so we'll start with a wine and really make sure it's hitting the front of your palate and working all the way through, and trying to really satiate your whole mouth, and then we'll start working on aroma. And color's never really been super important to me. I don't, that's really not even in consideration. So I want the wine to be, have a lovely bouquet to open up with, because that brings you to your glass. But I think mouthfeel's super important, and maybe a little bit more important than nose, even though that might be the first thing you experience. I think people are forgiving. Something might not be quite as open, and then they taste it and they're like, oh, wow, this is amazing. So you have that second chance. But I think if it only, if there's shortcomings on the palate, then it's going to be a bigger disaster. So that's what we work on first and kind of work from there.
So if space aliens were to land on your property, because I know you were anticipating this question, which of your wines would you present them with? Let's see if you pick the same wine, different wines.
Wow, space aliens. How about the Valdegay?
Okay.
Yeah, fresh, fruity. I think that would be a good one. We like that one. That one's amazing. Right out of the press, it tastes like it's ready to go, so let's...
What would you want to serve them?
I think something a little bit harder hitting. I think Zinfandel, because if they're coming here in peace, then we'll get the party started right. And if they're going to war, then it helps if the aliens are drunk and hungover the next day. So
I like how you pick the really refreshing one and you pick like the big boy.
Yeah, so you have to be very practical.
So, we're here in California, a pretty consistent temperature, but how do you approach vintage? When you've been here for more than a decade, do you see that year after year there's more variation or more similarity from any vintage to another?
I think we probably are getting more and more curveballs, but luckily living in California, we don't tend to have that much rain during harvest. It has happened.
Or ever.
But no, I don't know I can't remember what year it was, but we got a full foot in October one year, like 5-11 something like that. We couldn't even flip our picking bins over. We had to pick them up with a forklift. So,
wow.
But yeah, we're getting later and later frosts. we had some frost scares. It didn't luckily happen, but it was at the last week of May this year, so which would be pretty devastating.
Yeah. So are there any signs or omens that you look for that will help you predict what a harvest is going to bring you, what a vintage is going to bring?
That's a tricky one. I wouldn't say there's any omens, but I mean, we have a bottling date in the first week of August almost every year, and it's a pretty rapid gear shift. Once that bottling date is over, then like in the past we've picked the day after bottling, first week in August. So before that happens, we're just thinking about bottling really, and then once that's over and all the wines are safely in bottle, it's like go time for harvest pretty much. So
sort of your trigger.
Yeah. I think for me, it's maybe that last potential of frost is, I remember a couple years ago going out and taking pictures of my vineyard thinking, oh man, this is the best it's ever looked. And then like 4 days later, frost snuck in and it was, everything turned black and fell off. So, So that's the biggest
maybe
relief.
It's holding your breath during certain periods of time.
The more we get into farming, the more frustrating that can be. So,
do you have any traditions that you as a winery have, or as a team at the start or finish of harvest?
Not at the start or the finish, but during we consume a fair amount of beer.
That's definitely good.
So no, I don't shave through harvest, or we break a bottle of champagne over the first bit. None of those.
There's plenty of unshavenness going on. Yeah, Daniel usually can draw it out a little longer than me. I've gone most of harvest, but it gets pretty scratchy for me.
I'm just a beard growing machine.
So, do you? We're looking out at your vineyards. You're probably very familiar with them. You spend a lot of intimate time here on the property. I'm curious, do you talk to your vines? And if so, what do you say to them?
I don't.
I don't either. And I think if I started, Sherman might commit me to a mental institution. So,
well, when it gets into the cellar, do you talk to the wine in the cellar? Do you play music? I mean, do you have a philosophy towards that, or it's just individualism?
We're just coaxing it on physically, I guess, more than anything. There's no telepathy or anything like that going on, or massaging.
Anytime we make rackings, I actually like to listen to punk, basically. And I want the wines to be hard and edgy, and so I think if we're going to move them, then shake them up a little bit with little dead candies or something like that.
So, Sherman, when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Wow. I think in the early days it was the normal stuff like a fireman and whatnot, but I don't really specifically think I had anything that stuck with me for any long period of time until I kind of figured it out.
And what were you doing before you started making beer and wine, or professionally?
I started that right out of college. That was my first job making beer, and then I started making wine the following year. So before that, it was just working on campus trying to get by. So bartending and whatnot. So
always in the field of beverage.
Yeah.
What about you, Daniel? What do you want to be when you grew up?
I always wanted to be a writer, so that's kind of what I went to school for, is actually. And then while I was there, I ran cross country and track and field. So, I also wanted to be a professional distance runner, but neither of those things have quite panned out. So. And
just working in a wine store sort of piqued that interest for you?
Yeah, actually it was a tasting room first. And then I kind of worked my way backwards into working in the vineyards, and I graduated and was either get an office job or work harvest, and working harvest seemed way more fun. So.
And what do you guys do when you're not working? Do you have free time, and how do you spend it?
Not a huge amount of free time. I mean, I have 3 kids, so a lot of it is entertaining them. But I do like fishing a lot, so I try and sneak away and go on a couple fishing trips. I started one last year, and so it's become an annual thing, hopefully, with a couple other winemakers, and we roll off to wherever. So I do think about fishing a lot, talk about it, and then fish quite a bit less than that. But
what about you, Daniel? What do you do in your free time?
I still read quite a bit, so I'm usually working on a couple books. Sherman was kind enough to just actually install internet at my little shack down on the edge of the property, so now I have Netflix. It's killed my reading time a little bit, so I'm not quite plowing through them as fast as I used to be, but no, I still get a good chunk of reading done, yeah, so.
Do you guys have a favorite film dedicated to wine?
I don't, no. I don't watch a ton of TV. You know, whenever it goes on, I'm fighting with the kids, and so I usually just... So
yeah, not a lot of wine themes in kid television.
No.
And you just got Netflix, so...
Right. I liked Mondovino. I liked sort of the part in the second Saw movie where it was more the winemakers talking. I thought that was really interesting.
The more documentary style.
Yeah.
So, Sherman, a romantic evening with your wife? What wines are you going to pull out to make her happy?
We definitely start with sparkling, and we might even finish with sparkling because that
makes her smile.
Yeah, that's definitely her number one beverage, sparkling or obviously champagne. But yeah, from there it really depends on what time of year, what we're eating, or what we're doing. You know, whether we go to red or if we stick with whites. So the sparkling it would commence with for sure.
What about you, Daniel, if you're planning a romantic evening?
I like to keep things pretty light. So, I mean, I would think Riesling, Chenin, but something not too serious. Not, I don't want it to be the focus of the evening. I want to sort of enhance the evening. So something that, I don't feel bad about opening, or not that it shouldn't be a serious wine, but, I don't want every romantic evening to break the bank either, and otherwise they're few and far between. So
2 years from now, we're having another great date night.
Fair enough. So I'm curious, a little more thoughtful here. Let's go deep. What's the best advice you ever received, and by whom?
I would say from my dad, just own your own business and be your own boss. And you might have to work more, but you have more flexibility. And, my dad had his own business, and I probably didn't really think about it that much. But as I got closer to having my own business, I am realizing the benefits of, and there's plenty of negative things too, but, but it is nice not being told what to do by other people. Mm-hmm. I enjoy that.
Daniel?
Well, I've gotten a lot of colloquial advice, which I'm not sure is totally appropriate for your podcast, but
if it's the best advice you received, share along.
Geez. I'll keep it a little bit PC, I think, but I've had lots of people as I think about where I'm going in the wine industry, just saying, take things slow. It's something Sherman said to me a bunch is, take it slow and make sure you're doing it right. And if you're going to come out with your own project, come out guns blazing, and don't make 1,000 cases your first year. Make sure it's something sustainable and authentic and unique. So, yeah.
The old adage, slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you could offer our listeners some advice, what advice would you give them?
Wine is a huge world, and, I explore it as best you can. It brings people together, and it's a pretty neat thing. We've gone to intern parties at other wineries where there's interns from all over the world, and, Daniel's bumped into people that he's worked with in multiple countries at the winery just down the road. So it's, it brings people together, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I would say, don't take wine too seriously. I mean, for sure it's the most serious beverage in the world, but
but don't take it seriously.
Yeah, find an excuse to drink it every day, and not every bottle needs to be a cult wine that you're drinking every night. If you can find a humble wine that's delicious and brings you lots of, sort of joy and satisfaction, and then find an excuse to open that bottle 6 nights a week, and then the other night open something a little bit more special. But yeah.
Absolutely. So what would you say is your proudest achievement to date in your work?
Wow.
And I do say in your work because I know most people usually say my kids, which is fair enough.
I think just getting stuff to bottle, it's nothing specific. I don't have a certain wine that I'm overly proud about. I like them all, and I'm just happy to get them in front of people and have people enjoy them. It's more than, that's probably the coolest thing.
And Daniel, you're just starting your career, but to date, anything sort of stand out that you're pretty, proud of accomplishing?
Yeah, I'm kind of echoing what Sherman just said. I mean, we're basically just custodians of the wine here and making wine in the way that we do, which, we're fermenting everything wild. We're not adding water or acid or anything like that. And, we're using a little bit of sulfur when it's appropriate. It's pretty low intervention. And yeah, getting that to bottle is every year is it's a challenge, and it's, always a relief. Bottling day is the last day to sort of screw everything up. And unless you stab a pallet of wine with a forklift or something, that might be a big post-bottling screw up. But yeah, doing that's awesome. So
I want you to complete the sentence for me. Whoever's first answers first. I'm not putting the pressure on either.
Okay.
A table without wine is like?
It's like a non-bearing fruit tree.
It's like a table without women. Like a dude's night out is awesome, but if you add a little mixed company, it kind of elevates the whole social situation to the next level. So
now I want you to imagine a scenario that somebody is sitting at a table in a restaurant, someone famous, famous to you, from any walk of life, and the paparazzi shoot them through the window, and on the back of the photo is your bottle sitting on the table. Who would you want, living or dead, would you want to be drinking your wine?
Sure, me got one?
Silence. I don't really follow
from any walk of life.
Or, I just...
I want to be another winemaker. Like, I think if someone like, Jean-Louis Chauve or someone like that was drinking our wine, that would be super flattering and, super satisfying for me. So
I like that answer.
We'll take that answer.
Yeah, we'll stick with that.
Where do you think we'll be in a couple 100 years' time or even longer? You think we'll still be drinking wine, making wine, or?
Depending on what happens with climates, it's hard to really say, but absolutely. I mean, we've been drinking wine for thousands of years, and I don't see it going away. Mm-hmm. It might go, through its cycles, but it's definitely something that people are going to enjoy for a long time.
And wine's kind of special because it's one of the only agricultural products where, there's a real concern about the regionality of the wine and where it's actually from. No one really cares where their corn on the cob came from. I mean, some people do with the whole farm to table movement. Maybe that is actually happening more. But I don't think people are going to give up that sort of sense of place and the connection with consuming a product from that place anytime soon. So I hope not, at least.
So we're sitting here sipping your rosé of Cinsault, which is absolutely aromatically beautiful, nice acidity. I'm enjoying it. I'm thinking it's a hot day. I want you to tell me what you'd want to be drinking, the 3 wines, on your deserted island. Was that a good segue?
That's a good segue. Well, I wouldn't do sparkling because it'd be gone too quickly. So, but
you could have an endless supply.
Oh, perfect. Oh. Well, maybe I'd switch my answer.
No.
A nice icy cold sparkling wine would be probably a good way to refresh yourself. And it would have to be something light and acidic, all the way around. So maybe a sparkling, a white, and a rosé. But I probably wouldn't get into red unless it was something, 12% or less and pretty refreshing and bright. So.
What are your 3 deserted island wines?
I'd bring probably cabinet level Riesling from a really quality producer. Probably something a little bit heavier, but still light and refreshing. Maybe like Mondouse from the Savoy. Those wines have been really cool and super quaffable, and maybe something a little bit more serious, like Rayas, a good vintage of Rayas or something like that for really special occasions on the desert island. But yeah.
Okay.
Specific.
2 more questions. We're almost finished. So the first is playing a little game here. Wine, music, called Wine Soundtrack after all. So based on the wines that we talked about today, some of the different wines, I want you to tell me what kind of music it either makes you think of or what you want to listen to. And I know we're going to have very different things. So let's start with a wine you're both going to share, but the music might be different. Let's do this Rosé of Cinsault that we're enjoying right now.
I've been listening to lots of kind of like lo-fi surf punk sort of stuff, which it's sort of light and lots of distortion and, sort of fuzzy but great background music. And this is a great wine for sort of a great background wine that kind of, helps lubricate the social situation. So, yeah.
Well, I think depending on the environment, I might even break out some reggae and chill with that. Drink this in the pool and blast that in the background.
Nice. Okay, well, either one tempts me. Okay, so Sherman, what about, you said that you like lighter style red wines. So looking at like a Mourvèdre.
You can make most wines in a light style. So I like a lot of the Rhone varietals, and, we make a GSM, and we make it Grenache based. And so that's lighter, and we like pushing that to the forefront of that blend. But we have a Mourvèdre based wine as well.
So for your GSM, what kind of music conjures up?
Oh, we're talking about music still.
Oh, we haven't left that wine.
Oh, geez. Man, I'm still stuck in just listening to 80s rock most of the time. Poor Daniel. Like, everyone's annoyed, but it's just, I click on that and it's just going in the background, and I'm happy as can be. So
how can you get annoyed by listening to 80s music nonstop? I'll never understand that. And Daniel, what about your beloved Riesling, a Cabernet?
I think like Bikini Kill, like sort of riot girl music, because it's very feminine but mean and edgy and sort of that sharp acidic edge. Bikini Kill.
Let's
for
talk,
music, huh?
Yeah, let's talk about that sparkling wine you drink oh so too quickly.
Okay, well, we made a sparkling Viognier, which tastes pretty good. It was aged on its lees for about 5 years, so.
Okay, so a little more texture, mouthfeel. So What does that kind of conjure up?
Probably still falls into that category. It'd be like, I don't know.
We're gonna go with 80s rock still?
Yeah, it's
You stuck in a rut.
I could go back to the Beatles. I don't know. It's I annoy everyone by listening to that as well. I enjoy the Beatles station. I know a lot of their songs, and it's
classic band for classic beverage.
Yeah. So.
And Daniel, why don't you end that third wine that you take to your deserted island?
Ooh, Rayas. I think, probably my favorite band, and one of my favorite bands for listening to music, would be The National. So one of their earlier albums, I think I'd want to sit with that bottle throughout the entire album and just digest both of them. So.
Well, great. So before we end, I just want to know, you have the pleasure of living on a vineyard, and you've traveled a bit and visited other wine regions. What's one wine region around the world that's at the top of your list to go to?
Wow. I think for me, it's kind of not necessarily fully related to wine, though. It's I've always wanted to go to New Zealand, so I'd love to explore the region there. But it's also because they have really good fly fishing there. So if it was just wine, I'd probably like to dig into Spain pretty deep. I really like the wines from there, and I haven't spent a lot of time drinking wine in Spain. So.
And Daniel?
Well, the obvious answer is almost the Mosel, but actually, I've been really obsessed with the wines from the Canaries for the last couple months, and the vineyards there are insane. I mean, the wind is so crazy. They just dig a crater and plant one vine, and this crater of volcanic ash, and it's just miles and miles of vineyards planted like that. think to see something like that in person would be totally mind-boggling. So I'd love to see that.
So while you two start planning your trips, if people want to plan their trip and come visit you, how do they do that? Where do they go? Can they find you? Can they visit? And online, can they purchase your wine?
We have a website like most people. We're open every day from 11 to 5, which we just graduated to recently. And we're in Paso Robles on the west side, out on Vineyard Drive appropriately. So we're happy to have anyone here. You know, it's we got a lot of people who are just getting into wine who roll in, and we're happy to talk about wine and welcome them and educate them. So it's and
if anyone's visiting the region, we've also got a little rental house of VRBO on our second property, which is, it's a 23 acres and 15 planted. We're farming it organically.
So if you really want the vineyard experience, that's perfect.
Sleep for a couple nights out. I mean, light pollution out there is basically nil. It's a cool little spot for sure.
Great view.
Yeah, right on top of the hill.
See a lot of other vineyards from there, and look pretty far south. So
that sounds amazing. Well, Sherman and Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today at Wine Soundtrack. I hope you had fun answering those questions.
Yeah.
And I've been enjoying sipping your wines. We started with Viognier, Little Cinsault Rosé, and I think we're going to move on to red wines now. So thank you guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.